break. And I will check to see if folks have any questions or comments from Jenny. Great information, nice pace. Thank you. Thanks, Jenny. I appreciate that. Again, if you're wanting to share anything from your professional knowledge or experience, I always think that's really helpful for everybody else, definitely including me. And feel free to put that in there as we're going, or if you have any comments or questions. And I will usually try to stick around for a minute or two afterwards if someone has a question and they want me to get into it. We will end on time. We're very respectful of your time. But if you're feeling like, oh, I had this thing that I suddenly thought about, you can absolutely check in with me after the training. So let's go ahead and get started. And I am going to go ahead and share the screen again. So let me get the slides up again. And we are going to spend the rest of our time talking about the calmer skills. Sorry, I have to get these windows closed here so I can see it. Okay, so we talked about trauma responsive care is kind of the next step after being trauma informed. We want you to have some tools to actually deal with the person that you're dealing with. And that starts with helping someone to feel safe, connected, and in control before asking anything else of them. It's really important to keep in mind that feeling safe and being safe could be two different things. I always use the example of if any of you have flown in a plane, you've probably heard this because for some reason, everyone on earth knows this fact. I don't know how we all know it, but everyone seems to know it, that you are safer in a plane than you are in your car. And in fact, not just a little bit safer, but much safer. Statistically, you are much safer in that plane. I don't know about you guys, but if you've ever flown, I do not feel safer, right? I feel safer in my car, even though I know I'm not safer. In fact, no one is safer when I'm in my car because I'm probably driving and yelling at my kids and putting on mascara and drinking coffee all at the same time. But because I feel like I'm in control, probably because I'm driving and I'm not driving the plane, the fact that I am safe doesn't necessarily translate into me being safe. This is important because a lot of the professionals that I work with or talk to in audiences are part of a very conscientious workforce, right? They try very hard to make sure that the people in their care are safe, at least when they're with them. But we all know that sometimes even with the best intentions, things can still happen. And especially as we talked about with trauma, time really doesn't mean the thing that we think it means. So the fact that someone wasn't safe maybe years before is still something they're dealing with and feeling now. So knowing that someone is safe versus helping them to feel safe, two different things. We talked about how this should be a universal precaution. And we didn't talk about this much before the break, so I'll just go into it a little bit because I want to use the rest of our time with calmer, but I will point this out. We know that, as we said, many populations, and the example I've been using has been people with developmental disabilities, have big T traumas maybe at higher rates than the general population. We also know that those may be underreported. And again, this is true of many populations. If any of you work with women dealing with sexual assault, that is probably vastly underreported, right? So we can't look at the numbers and assume that those are accurate. We have to assume that there are more people affected even than we know about. Now, one of the things that happens when people go through this training and talk to us afterwards is they'll typically say something like, we need to be doing a better job screening for trauma. And we always have the same response. We always say, yes, that would be great. So if you're already screening, make sure you keep doing that. If you haven't done that in the past, maybe start doing that. That is a great idea. And you will still miss some trauma. You will. We know that already. And we know it for a couple of reasons. Again, talking about people with developmental disabilities as an example, just because someone reports a trauma doesn't mean that it's heard or taken seriously. It doesn't mean that it's followed up on correctly. And it doesn't mean that it gets reported on down the line. When you're dealing with, let's say, older adults with developmental disabilities, which some of you may be, you know, that information just doesn't exist anymore. What was their early childhood like? Who knows, right? They could have been raised by wolves. We don't know with this 70-year-old that we're dealing with. So there are going to be some traumas that the individual doesn't report or can't report if they are non-speaking, or that just sort of gets lost along the way. So you're going to lose some big T trauma, but that's not even your biggest problem. Your biggest problem is little t trauma. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've seen multiple versions for kids, for adults, for disabilities, for trying to screen for possible big T traumatic events in someone's life, and that's great. I've never yet seen an instrument that measures how many times a day someone feels misunderstood or devalued, or that they weren't given a choice about something, or they don't fit in with other people, or they don't have agency over their life. Something that can mathematically measure that, I've never seen it, not in the scale that we would need it to be. So maybe someone would invent that someday, and that would be great. But until then, there's this whole other part of trauma that we're not catching if we only focus on screening. So by all means, screen. If you're not doing it, start doing it. If you're doing it, maybe do more of it. But you also need trauma responsive care as a universal precaution, because if you're treating me as if I need to feel safe, connected, and in control, especially when I seem to be out of my window of tolerance, but even if you're, before anything else happens, then even if you never find out about some level of trauma that I have, you're still going to be doing the thing that helps me get back into my window of tolerance. And if you help me do that over and over and over and over again, then we're actually talking about the elements of healing trauma. So trauma responsive care as a universal precaution, we sometimes talk about it as the net that will catch the traumas that otherwise you will miss. Now, the last thing on this slide is that it needs to be applied throughout your agency. That, again, is a different training that's largely done by my partner, Kevin, and talking about how do you integrate this into an entire agency? Because as we know, human services is actually performed by human beings. And so, we as therapists or teachers or staff people or SSAs or whatever, we also have our own history and our own issues, and our brains are built the same way. So whether we have a significant trauma history or not, we still can feel scared or threatened, and we can still go into those hyper or hypoarousal states, right? All animals on earth can do that in some way or another. And so if you are looking to become a trauma responsive care agency or a trauma responsive care county or whatever it is, then everyone should be treating everyone that way. If I'm a supervisor and I'm sitting down with my staff person, then I'm going to try to be figuring out how they can feel safe, connected, and in control with me. And as we've been saying with individuals and kids, this doesn't mean that it's consequence free. If I'm a supervisor and I'm sitting down with you and I'm talking with you about you need to come to work on time, or you need to get that paperwork done, or whatever, I'm still going to have those standards for you. We're still going to do that. We're still going to have that feedback or whatever, but I can do it in a way that takes into account how you can feel safe, connected, and in control, so that you can hear me, so that we can communicate about it to whatever extent we need to do that. So it is possible to think about your entire agency or your entire classroom or school system or whatever it is as working to become a trauma responsive care agency. So that's how we think about that. Okay, the last thing that we are going to talk about today, I know I keep saying this. I need to say one last thing. Trauma responsive care has a relational base. And we believe that that can fit in with any other model that you might be using in your workshop or group home or classroom or whatever that is. Even something that has a behavioral focus to it, like ABA or whatever, I believe you can do this with a TRC approach, a TRC stance, if you will, in terms of how you are talking to and relating to that other person. So if you're in early childhood, you're doing floor-based stuff, home-based, whatever it is, I don't care, TRC can be woven into that. Okay, so I can talk so much more about stuff that I do not have time to talk about with you guys, but with the time that we do have today, let me wrap up with this, and this is the calmer skills. And we start with this basic truth, and it just makes sense. If we don't feel safe, connected, and in control of, this is a misprint, it should say ourselves, we can't help other people feel that way. I'm gonna have to change that slide. That just makes sense. And if any of you have worked with people who are highly traumatized, or people who are non-speaking, or young children, you know that people are going to be able to, I'm going to get off that slide because that misprint's driving me crazy. The more compromised someone might be at communicating, the more in tune they are to the feelings of the people around them. I've worked with people who have dealt with people with profound disabilities that are bedbound and non-speaking at all. And the sensitive staff people and nurses that I've talked to have said, I still feel like they know how I'm feeling when I walk in the room, right? And those of you who work with kids, you know what I mean. Those kids, when you walk into that room or that classroom or whatever, they know how you're feeling probably before you do, right? So people can be very, very attuned. If you are someone who has lived through early, severe, or chronic trauma, reading the mood of someone else and adjusting to that may have saved your life. And so I am used to, when I walk into, let's say, my therapy office, if I'm dealing with someone who has high levels of trauma, they are like human antenna. They can feel everything. They are attuned to the smallest things. So what that means is, if we are angry or frightened or checked out, it's really hard to get the other person across from us to try to be integrated and in their window and grounded, or however you want to describe it. If we don't feel safe, connected, and in control, at least to an extent, we're not going to be able to get them there, because whatever words we might be saying, if we can't, as the kids would say, vibe with them and try to be where we want them to get to, it's not going to work. In fact, those of you who work with people, I notice this a lot with teenagers, that if a staff person was trying to calm down an agitated, upset teenager, a lot of times it didn't even seem to matter very much what they were saying. It mattered how they were saying it. Or if any of you have done psychiatric work, you've been at an emergency facility or a psych unit or something like that, when people are very, very agitated or possibly psychotic and disconnected from reality, what you're saying, they can't even really process. What they can process is the expression on your face, the sound of your voice. It's possible even pheromones are involved, like on a level that we're not conscious of. They can smell how you feel. So we have to have a way to recognize and regulate what's going on with us. When I work with my grad students, self-awareness and self-regulation are a major part of every class that I taught, whether it was about trauma or other things. So what we've done with the Calmer skills is I've broken these down into very simple skills that you can teach an hourly worker, a classroom aide, a direct service professional, that you can use if you're a manager or a supervisor or a clinician or a CEO. Really, anybody can do these things. And the thing that I think is so important here is that people often enter into doing some kind of trauma work with the idea that they're going to change the person they're working with. But really, in order to set them up to have the experiences they need for their brain to heal over and over and over and over, we have to start with working with ourselves. It's not about changing that person. It's about working in an aware and skillful way with ourselves. We become our own instrument. Make sense? So how do we do this? The Calmer skills. I just kind of came up with like a little acronym for this. Some elements of this have been adapted from the work of like Daniel Siegel. So if you're familiar with him and his work with mindfulness, he has a model that I've sort of changed and expanded a little bit. So I want to acknowledge and credit that. So starting with checking in, see, what does that mean? It means asking yourself, what are your thoughts, feelings, and sensations right now, in this moment? What are you feeling in your body? What are you sensing in your body, feeling in your emotions and thinking? When I'm in a session with someone, they can say things that are upsetting or scary or heartbreaking, or it triggers something in my past or whatever it is. And I have to be in touch with that. So at any given moment, I may need to take that half second. They're not even aware of it. You know, they're talking or doing whatever. I take that half second to check in and ask myself, what's going on in my body? Do I feel relaxed? Do I feel comfortable? Do I feel warm? Do my muscles feel soft? Or do they feel tight? Or do I feel numb or cold? I've noticed for myself that when I'm checking out in a session, one of the first signals that I get sometimes is that I'm yawning a lot. I know that sounds weird. Now, it might not be that I'm triggered. It might be that I'm tired or that my blood sugar is low. I don't necessarily have the answer immediately, but I have to start with asking the question, what is going on with me right now? And the next thing, and this may sound like a small thing, but it's actually in some ways the whole ball game. I have to accept whatever the answer is. That sounds easy, and it can be hard to do. And I don't know if I have any guys in the audience today. I'm definitely talking to you guys too. I don't want to feel like I'm excluding you. But I do think that for women, often we really struggle with this. I find that there are a lot of messages about we're supposed to be always emotionally available, always patient, always understanding, always compassionate, whatever. Whether that's on our job, working with our clients or with our coworkers or with family, with friends. One of the things that a lot of people dealt with over the pandemic that I talked to was that feeling that we're supposed to be running around taking care of everybody else while we're in the same boat, right? We're all in the same boat. The boat is on fire and we're running around taking care of everybody else. So I would point out to you that, again, both men and women, but especially women, we may sometimes have very critical reactions if we do find that we're triggered or we're angry or we're out of patience or we're disconnected or whatever it might be. So it's really, 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 really important that we start with whatever you're feeling is okay. If I'm busy yelling at myself that I'm a bad therapist because someone has said something that's upsetting or triggering, I'm going to spend the whole session being mad at myself. And if you think about the stress chemicals of the brain, what is that stress creating in my brain? It's creating more stress. It's keeping that fire alarm going off, right? It is literally doing the opposite of what I'm trying to do. So if I can say to myself, okay, you're freaked out right now, or you're sick of this, or you're frustrated, or you're sad, or whatever, that immediately starts releasing that dopamine and serotonin, right? And that allows my brain to get back online and allows me to be able to react and respond skillfully and appropriately to what's going on. It actually makes me a better helper if I am accepting of my own experience. It makes me more skillful. Now, we do another training that we will not be doing in this series about emotional self-care and burnout and compassion fatigue and the brain science that's emerging around that. Again, if that's something that you're interested in hearing more about, please feel free to get in touch with us. But we go into a lot more detail about exactly why that is. For now, just trust me when I tell you, it really will make you better at whatever it is you're trying to do in that moment if you can say something accepting to yourself in that moment about whatever you are feeling. Now, obviously, having a feeling and acting on that feeling can be two different things, right? So you can feel angry. It doesn't mean that you want to scream at that person or it's okay to punch them in the face. It probably isn't. So we're not saying that whatever you do is okay. We're saying whatever you feel is okay. All right? And the next one, lovingly kind. These two things almost are the same thing. The way that I talk to myself in that moment makes a huge difference. Do I say something lovingly kind to myself? Like, that's okay, Lara, you're trying really hard and this is tough. Great. Maybe I can do something lovingly kind for myself, depending on what the situation is. Maybe I can take a break and step outside, get a breath of fresh air. Another thing that just as an example for me that may not fit for you is I easily get low blood sugar. I know this about myself. I try to plan for it. Anyone who knows me or works with me knows that I am all about snacks. I've usually got snacks, multiple places squirreled away wherever I am. But sometimes I still forget to eat. And that can make me irritable and clumsy, and I get kind of foggy and it's hard for me to focus. So let's say that I've checked in with myself. Oh, my blood sugar is low. And I accept that, yep, that's what's happening. I don't have to yell at myself about it. I don't have to, criticize myself. Why did you let this happen? I can just, as my Jewish grandmother used to say, eat something. Maybe the lovingly kind thing at that moment is I just take a second and I eat a granola bar. or I get a drink of water, or I pop in to talk to a colleague or a coworker that I know is going to maybe be nicer to me than I'm being to myself at that moment. So it can be something elaborate, or it can be something as simple as saying something nice to yourself, lovingly kind. Again, what are we doing? We're releasing dopamine and serotonin, which start to break down the norepinephrine and cortisol, among other neurotransmitters, that actually help us stay present and stay online. Okay, next one, mindful. Mindful is a big popular word right now, which I love, right? We can always use as many opportunities as possible to try to be mindful. It can mean different things to different people. And here we're talking about it in the simplest form. Mindful just means being here, looking at what is happening, and sometimes more importantly, what is not happening. So let me give you guys an example. I've worked in various mental health settings where we would sometimes have to call the police, right? Things, I was about to use a bad word. Things were going down, let's just say that. And so I don't know if any of you have had this experience, and this is not a commentary on the larger political conversation about the police. It's just to say that my personal experience was that how the police entered the situation predicted the outcome. This is what I experienced, that if the police officers involved came in calm, and I will say that we had good luck usually, and that was often the case, that they would come in kind of slow, kind of calm, what's going on? They were listening. When their energy was slow, it tended to slow things down. And chances were they were going to be able to get the situation dealt with and leave without having to, arrest somebody or whatever. If they came in hot, if they came in barking and yelling and tense and stressed out, I knew somebody was going away in cuffs, probably at least one kid, maybe more. I just knew it, right? How they dealt with what was going on, often it at least strongly influenced, if not controlled, the outcome of what was going to happen next. Now, what that means is, I think, when you look at situations that blow up, whether that's with two individuals or a kid and a parent or staff persons or whatever, you can almost see it happening. You can see people tightening up and getting into a power struggle, and pooh, that's going to blow sky high. And I want to be really clear. Sometimes some situations are really hard to deal with. You've got a teenager or an individual or a kid or whatever it is, and it's crazy stressful. And despite your best efforts, they might still be going to the hospital or being arrested or whatever it is. But if you look at the situations that blew up when they didn't have to, and I don't know if any of you are ever the people who have to review an incident. I often had to do that. If you would go back to the family member, the staff person, or whoever, and be like, why did you do that? Typically what they'll say is, well, I was afraid that ... would happen. Okay. They started overreacting, literally overreacting, because of something they were worried was going to happen, not what was happening. Let me give you an example. A lot of the folks that we work with in the developmental disabilities field, they will have individuals who, when they get agitated or upset, will take off running. And that's really dangerous, right? That can end tragically, which unfortunately we've also had to try to help agencies with. So, if you've got an individual or a kid in a school or whatever that's going to bolt out the door and run across a freeway, you need to respond to that, right? So let's say that I'm that individual, and before I take off running, you know me well enough to know that sometimes I start rocking and pacing and muttering, and you're my staff person and you're like, uh-oh, all right, looks like she's about to bolt. Would it make sense for you to maybe strategically position yourself in front of the door so that you can stop that if that happens? Sure, that's a great precaution. Definitely do that. Should you run across the room and tackle me? No, that's too much, right? And so if somebody were then to interview you and you said, well, I was afraid she was going to run, the next question would be, was she running at that moment? No. Right? So my experience starting as an hourly worker way back in college and all the way up to being the supervisor of people, I know how stressful and scary things can look. But when people start overreacting because of what they're afraid will happen, as opposed to what is happening, that's when the wheels come off the wagon, right? So mindful in this moment just means look around. What's actually going on in this moment? And if it's not happening, maybe you don't need to already start reacting as if it is, right? Or if something is happening, deal with that. So mindful just means look at what's going on around you. And if you actually, if we're going to go back for a second, if you look at the first 3 skills, those are pretty much internal, what's going on inside you. With the last 3 skills, we start turning outward and looking at what's going on or dealing with what's going on outside of us, around us. So checking out what's going on inside us, accepting whatever the answer is, trying to be lovingly kind with whatever that is, and then turning around and looking outward, what is going on around me? What is not going on around me? And then the next one is expressive. This just means express your feelings, especially if something has been stressful or scary or triggering or whatever. That may be something that you can do in the moment, relatively, right? That may be saying to a coworker, hey, can you please come in and help me with this? Or can I talk with you and debrief with you because I just had a crazy day, or whatever. It might not be feasible to do that. Some of you work with shifts where you're the only person there, or there's just not really an appropriate moment for you to do that at work. That's fine. But those feelings need to go somewhere. Again, that's part of this other training that we talk about. But here I will just say they've got to go somewhere. Now, in my experience, there are some people that are very comfortable expressing their thoughts, and there's some people who just aren't. That's just not how they are. They don't like telling their feelings to other people, or they feel they're supposed to be taking care of other people's feelings. They're not supposed to need help themselves. So I'll share something with you guys about myself. This may surprise you, so get ready. I am a talker. I know, very surprising. I am happy to share my thoughts and feelings with the people around me, with my coworkers, with my business partner. In fact, if you're in line with me at the grocery store long enough, I'm probably going to talk to you and share some thoughts and feelings that I have. So for me, that's something that usually comes fairly easily, but not everybody is like that. And so I really want to say that you can work with whatever is comfortable for you. You don't have to be talking to everybody all the time. But if you find that those feelings never go anywhere, that's something that I hope you take time after this training today to look at and think about, whether that's finding a way to talk more with the people in your life, if they're trustworthy to do that, or a pastor, or maybe, finding a therapist and doing some of that work there. Even journaling, which is kind of talking to yourself, I find can be helpful. So there's got to be a place where that stuff can go. And then the last one is responsive. And that means taking some kind of action. That really can mean a lot of different things. That action might be self-care. That action might be working on the previous step. I'm going to take action to have places where these feelings have a safe place to be let out. Great. Responsive might be in the moment, in the situation. Okay, things are getting out of control. I'm going to now step in and intervene with the staff person who's getting into a power struggle with the individual, or I'm going to get all the other kids out of the room. I don't know about you guys, but I learned this lesson early on. The first thing you want to do is get rid of that audience. And usually you can control moving the audience away more easily than you can control moving the kid away. So I always focused on the audience. Whatever it is that you're going to do, you may have gone through these previous 5 steps in fractions of a second, right? This does not have to take a long time. Or responding could be addressing a long-standing work issue, and you really want to take your time with all of these thoughts. So if you're going to go to a supervisor or a superintendent or somebody and say, here's the situation that we have, that we keep having, here's what I feel needs to be changed, blah, blah, blah. You may have wanted to take weeks going through each one of these steps to feel confident and ready that you're going to address the situation in the most effective way. So this can be a matter of fractions of a second. This can be weeks, but it's a process that we go through to give ourselves the best chance to be safe, connected, and in control ourselves to some extent. You don't have to be the Dalai Lama. You don't have to be perfectly grounded and enlightened, but you do need to have some sense of groundedness and presence. And this is, using brain science, the most efficient way to get there. And then you can do whatever else comes next. Sometimes people think, as I've said, that we're going to do these trainings and we're going to give them the magic formula for the individual or the kid or whomever that they're working with, or the coworker who maybe has some of these issues or whatever it is. And of course we can't, because we don't know the individuals that you're dealing with in your life. You do. You are the expert on the individual that you're thinking about, not me. What I can do is be the expert about trauma and what happens in the brain, and then give you some skills that will hopefully put you in the best position possible to do what you need to do with that individual to help them feel safe, connected, and in control. How that gets translated, there are a million versions of that. Someone who's on the autism spectrum, for example, may experience connected very differently than I would. For me, if you want to feel connected with me, lots of eye contact, lots of talking, maybe a hug, that would be great for me. That would be terrible potentially for someone on the autism spectrum. So you can translate this in an infinite number of ways, but the principles remain the same. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. And let me see where we are with our time. I'd love to talk about that, but I don't have time for that. Okay, let me wrap up with some of these thoughts. How do we create healing experiences? This is a theme that I've sort of woven in all along the way, because ideally we're not just dealing with trauma, we're setting people up with the best opportunity to heal from trauma. So how do we do that? You'll notice that the first thing on this list is we help to have relationships that are safe, comforting, and warm. And again, that word relationship can encompass a lot of things. Maybe you're in this person's life for 6 months or a year or a few weeks or a few moments. I have experienced myself and have talked with other people who will talk about an interaction in some kind of crisis situation that lasted hours or moments that they remember for years afterwards that had that impact on them. So remember that whatever your interaction with someone, you have an opportunity to create at least moments that can feel safe, comforting, and warm. Offering experiences that allow a low, slow progression of stress while practicing calm and connecting behaviors. Okay, we have a little extra time, so I'm going to go into this one. This is, again, something that I did in my graduate courses. Really what I'm talking about here is sort of the skeleton of what trauma therapy really is. If we could get every kid who needed it or every individual who needed it into trauma therapy, that would be awesome. I don't think we have the resources to do that. Hopefully someday we will. But as a trauma therapist, I can tell you that it's really about the experiences in the relationships. And that doesn't have to happen in my office. And in fact, most of the time it won't. And it's wonderful if it happens in everyday settings in that person's life. But what are we doing? We're allowing someone to, hopefully in a controlled sort of way, actually experience some level of stress and then practice coming back into that window. We've talked about this before. They get hyper aroused, they get hypo aroused, and they come back. Remember before yesterday when I talked about triggers, and I said triggers are really not the point? Okay. One of the reasons for that is that imagine that somehow, magically, you could figure out every trigger that I have externally around me or even internally, and you could somehow create my life in such a way that I never get triggered. Well, that actually would not be good, right? The brain gets better at what it does a lot of. You want my brain to get used to what it is to get, hypo aroused, to get knocked out of my window. Hopefully not tremendously. You're not going to push me into a snake pit, but I experience stress. Maybe it's a little bit of stress. Maybe it's learning a new thing, or apologizing to my friend that I yelled at because they said Paw Patrol is stupid, or whatever. I don't know. There's some challenge, and then you help me to have an experience of success while experiencing that safe, comforting, empowering relationship with you, and my brain comes back into that window over and over and over and over and over and over. You are literally in your workshop or classroom or wherever you are, providing my brain with the same experience that therapy partly does, right? Take on a stressor, take on a challenge, have some better coping strategies because you've helped my brain get connected enough to use them. So this is a long and maybe more complicated way than you're interested to way of telling you that interactions in that workshop, interactions in that group home, interactions in that classroom or that after school program or whatever it is, really can replicate some of the crucial elements of therapy. Therapy does a lot of that stuff, no matter what model I'm using. So this is why what you're doing today and what you take with you into your work setting, whatever has been valuable and useful to you, really is important. And especially if you're struggling to find those other resources. If you can get someone who needs it to a skilled and competent trauma therapist, great. But that may not always be possible. And that's okay, because they can still have those healing experiences. Okay, I said enough about that. I could go on and on about the rest of the stuff on the slide, but we'll move on. How do we help people have these experiences? Well, think about how they can experience these things day to day. Things that are frequent, regular, and predictable. So if you help me feel connected with you by checking in with me every morning and asking me how my evening was and talking about what happened on Paw Patrol. I don't know why I'm fixated on that today, whatever. And it's regular and predictable, right? That's really, 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 really important. That it happens again in the context of that relationship. We've already explained that. Something that's associated with positive emotions, something that's fun or exciting or funny. Sometimes I think we forget in different treatment settings how boring life can be for some of the people we work with. I was once consulting with a small provider for adults with disabilities, and they were just going crazy because this one young woman, I think she was in her 20s, would threaten to kill herself every Saturday night. And of course, because they were responsible, they would have to call the squad, they would take her to be assessed. And what part of our conversation was identifying that this was fun and exciting and interesting. And there were sometimes, cute EMTs that she would get to flirt with a little bit. Much more fun than sitting around playing Uno every Saturday night. So finding things that are engaging or fun is a great way to release dopamine and serotonin. Remember that? And it's also helpful if it involves multiple senses. I feel like we're a lot more aware of this now than maybe we used to be. I see a lot of sensory rooms and enriched environments where people are really trying to appeal to that. If this is of interest to you, it may help you to know that the limbic system is also very, very, very involved in sorting out senses and identifying and labeling sensory experiences as positive or unpleasant or scary or what have you. And for reasons we don't have time to go into today, anything where you're involving the body also helps that brain integrate more quickly. When I worked with teenagers, especially, not exclusively, but especially boys, typically I would have my best conversations with them if we could walk around outside. Movement of the gross motor functions is regulating. If it was a nice fall day, I might ask them to focus on the sound of the leaves, the smell of the air, all of that. So if we can do something that's positive or interesting or fun, I played a lot of catch and football, one of the most successful staff people I ever worked with in a group home for teenagers would bring his motorcycle in and have the kids help him fix the motorcycle. And I don't know if any of you are motorcycle people, but if you are, you know that there's always something that needs to be worked on. And that was interesting and exciting and different, and it involved lots of sensory stuff. It gave them a sense of mastery, blah, blah, blah. And of course, you want to be responsive to somebody's culture, somebody's family background, whatever it is that is meaningful to them. So this is just an example of how you can think about the day or the classroom or the activities or whatever, and use a trauma responsive awareness to build in experiences that are going to be beneficial for that brain. And this is what we will end with. And then we'll, as I said, we'll leave some time at the end for any questions or comments that folks have. Of all the things that we've talked about and all of the therapies and all of the interventions and sensory rooms and behavior plans and all of those things, those are all great. Medication, awesome, right? They're all really important and sometimes powerful tools, but they are not what allows a brain to go from being poisoned by humans to being healed by humans. They are not what allows someone to feel safe enough in your company to try a new skill, to take the risk of letting somebody get to know them, to take the risk of connecting with another human being. The thing that is the most powerful in your arsenal is you. Whether you are the person actually interacting with that individual or that kid, or you are the person supporting and supervising the people that are going to do that, or you are the CEO keeping the lights on and sending people to training so they can do that, whatever it is, you are the most powerful tool that we have. And I would love it if someday we have a system where every child, every classroom, every individual, every group home, every person who's ever experienced the need for help from other human beings has enough of all of those other resources. And maybe someday we'll have that. I hope so. But I'm still very hopeful, because if I had to choose between all of those things and you, I would choose you every time, because I understand what actually helps brains heal. And you are the best chance that some folks have to experience that healing. And this is a quote from the late, great Irvin Yalom, a psychiatrist and a humanitarian that I really respect and admire. And he said, it is the relationship that heals. The reward systems, the tokens, all that other stuff, that's great. But it's really the relationship that allows brains to be here and to be present and to not miss out on their whole lives. So thank you guys for doing what you do. Thank you for being in these people's lives, or supervising and supporting the people who are going to be in their lives in a skillful and kind and loving way. And thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed getting to spend these 2 mornings with you. So we'll pause here. I'm going to go ahead and stop the slides, and we'll go to the comments. So sort of our last time together, if you have observations or comments or questions, this would be a great time for that. So let me go ahead and open that up. Ty Ankrum, great and excellent information. Thanks to you, Amanda, for connecting us. Thanks, Ty, appreciate that. I'm just gonna kind of hang out with you guys. Kevin, I don't know if you're gonna come back on and have any other kind of like last housekeeping stuff and give people a moment to comment if they want to.
Just very quickly, watch your email probably early next week for a link to recordings of this training. It'll come, the link will come in 2 parts, one for yesterday and one for today. And that's it. Thank you.
All right. Well, let me check. It looks like we're good in terms of comments. Again, you also have our content information, or I'm sorry, our contact information. Oh, wait, no, here's something from Marisa. Do you have any recommendations for staff who are less inclined to using TRC or TRC in their day-to-day conversations? Do I have any recommendations? Well, I think like everything, it probably would start with a conversation, right? So I think I would want to talk with people, and probably one-on-one if possible. That's usually easier. If you've got a group of people, they're like, meh. I think that's harder to break into. So I think if I'm dealing with somebody who feels to me like they are being like really, I hate this word, but resistant, you know, just for the conversation, I think I'd want to learn more. Typically there's a reason. So it might be, you know, I did this work for a long time as a part-time staff person, and I know what it feels like when there's some, you know, big new thing that the boss wants us to do. And I'm sort of like, because I've seen things sort of come and go. In fact, that's one of the things that Kevin covers in his training, is talking about how do you help if you're doing a trauma responsive care initiative at your agency or wherever, how do you help make that sustainable? So sometimes I think you have to win people over just because they see that it sticks around. And if you're the supervisor or the executive or whatever, and you're the person who is continually referring to it or using it, I think some people start to look at that and go, oh, okay, it seems like we're really going to do this. All right. So you might get buy-in a little bit later from some of those people. There are some people, I think, that find any conversation about trauma unpleasant because it might be triggering to them. They may not even be fully aware that that's the issue for them. And you'll notice that in our training over the past 2 days, I never, ever, ever asked you guys to reflect on your own experiences that may have been traumatic or stressful. I didn't share mine. I, in fact, specifically choose to use an example that's fairly specific. Now, I may have people in my audience who've had military experience, but usually that's not most of the settings. So I am very cognizant of the fact that trauma material can be triggering, and I try to be very aware of that. If you are dealing with a person, Marissa, that is just like, no, 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 obviously you can't be their therapist, and you can't say, gosh, do you have any trauma? Let's talk about it. But I do think that sometimes when people are respected and heard, and let's talk about the pieces of this so that you can sort of find out what this is and what it isn't. Sometimes when people have a chance to do that, they find out that the pieces are not going to be triggering, hopefully, that they are not going to be asked to reveal their trauma or deal with their trauma. Now, if you know that someone is struggling, you see that someone is struggling, I do hope that you guys have access to an EAP program. It might be that somebody is just so stressed out, so agitated that they need help to deal with that before they're going to be able to incorporate anything new you're asking them to do. But in my experience, if you kind of break it down into pieces a little bit, people find out that it's not some big, complicated, hard system that they're going to be asked to learn how to do, and that it actually is going to get them better outcomes. So to wrap this up, the last thing I would say is a lot of times when I'm like, if I have an audience of largely direct service professionals, sometimes I'll start with them about, what do you like about your job? What's a good day at work for you? And usually they don't say, I love it when I get to restrain kids, or I love it when I get to scream at my individual, or, you know, blah, blah, blah. They typically will say, unless they're just there for the money and they're a terrible staff person, and you might need to find a way to get rid of them, to be honest with you. But if there's anything salvageable there, typically they'll say something like, I like it when my individuals have a good day. I like it when I get to have conversations and not just, you know, yell at people to follow the rules all day. And so I'll start with, this system can help you have more of those days. Obviously, sometimes we're just going to have a day, but this will put you in a better position, and certainly in terms of dealing with the kids or the individuals that have dealt with traumas. So the last thing I would say, and I know I'm giving you a lot of information, but I'm really excited about this question, is this has the potential to make your job better, to make your job easier, to give you more of those days that you actually want to have. It's not a, you know, nothing is a magic wand, but we do see better workplace outcomes. So those are some of the things that I would think about if you're feeling like you're getting that people kind of digging their heels in. Any other questions or comments? I know we're right up to 11, and you guys have stuff that you need to do. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us individually, you know, outside of this as well. Okay, it looks like we're good. Thank you guys for those comments and questions, and thank you for everything you do, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.